Welcome back to the Silverthorne Signal. Once again, joined by Mayor Butler.
Glad to be back again.
All right, and we're continuing our discussion about the Smith Ranch. And I think at this point, maybe let's dive into, we've got the site plan in front of us here, the initial concept for the site plan. We'll throw that up on the screen and maybe kind of walk us through kind of how this site flows and how the planning has begun.
Well, ultimately, about 160 units of housing are envisioned. And at this point in time, there'll be a mixture of units, but we're looking at primarily a for sale component. And so as you move from east to west on the residential portion of the site, there will be a more dense pattern of housing on the eastern side, and it'll become a little less dense single family housing as you go further west.
So multifamily, then maybe some duplex, and then up to single family as you head up.
That's correct.
Okay, that looks good. Talk a little bit about, I think most people are familiar with AMI, area median income. That's sort of become one of the key phrases that we use when we're talking about workforce housing. What's the council thinking for sort of the sweet spot that you want to be for this particular development?
Right, and the council's had a lot of discussion on this, and where they're at this point in time is really to try and hit the 80 to 120% AMI range.
Okay. And I know that varies, depending on number of household members that you have and number of bedrooms that we're looking at. But overall, what does that mean for home prices? Like you said, when you're starting with multifamily all the way up to single family, what does that range look like?
Right, and it's quite a range. So on the 80% end, you're looking at about $225,000, and on the 120% end, you're looking at roughly $500,000.
Okay, so hopefully a broad range that will suit a lot of different needs that have come out of that the housing needs assessment studies that have been done over the years. I know it's early on, and we've talked a little bit about the site plan. But obviously, it's a very visible location, and we've got an opportunity to do something really cool for Silverthorne. What are the thoughts on architecture that are being discussed right now?
Well, and as you can imagine, anytime you're looking at a development that's being done with public funds, there's a lot of different opinion that is certainly put out there, and I think that right now the idea and the architectural trend on this particular property is to try and recognize some of the ranch heritage that this parcel was, and to try and incorporate those forms into the housing product.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned forms, which is important. There have been a couple of different focus groups where people have been sort of pulling different visuals out that may resonate for that property, and some of the building materials in some of those pictures, which we can share here, may not work when you're talking about an affordable neighborhood, because like you said, you're using tax funds to create something, and so you may not have some of those higher end finishes, but you said the form, I think those shapes and that feel. But I know it's important for council that long-term affordability is also important in those designs.
I couldn't agree more. I think one of the most neglected aspects of the workforce housing projects that are being looked at all over the country is what's the real long-term cost of ownership. And between material selection and certainly understanding the environment in which you are building this housing, it's extremely important. And we have a lot of snow, we have a lot of melt, we certainly can get a lot of ice damming on roofs. And so how you design and orient buildings is really critical to how they're going to perform in our environment. And for me, it's extremely important that the housing not be too expensive down the road, that HOA fees not be too high, and that we really are not only getting people into a good fit for them initially, but we're also helping them to afford it for the long haul.
Yeah.
To me, that's real sustainability.
Yeah, I know that's been a huge discussion point for the council, and something that will be focused on throughout the planning process. So maybe going back to the site plan again, I do see some greenways and other things, but I think the proximity of this neighborhood to some of our other amenities is really important to talk about.
Well, and that's right. Everybody certainly loves greenways and parks, and certainly the town council does as well. We have our wonderful sport committee in town that just does such great work and has helped us with all sorts of trails and trail connections and a lot of great park amenities. But one of the keys to affordability here is to try and maximize the housing density that is on this parcel. And in that case, it provides more housing for people, but it also helps lower the cost because you're spreading the costs of the larger amenities across more people. So we're very fortunate in this particular case that we are close to Trent Park, which has seen some improvements, but also will see some considerable improvements going forward. And we also envision ultimately a loop trail around town, and this would certainly have a reasonable access to that, and of course the county-wide trail system as well. So there are a lot of opportunities to recreate and for playgrounds and things like that immediately adjacent or very close to the property, as well as maybe some little things that can be incorporated into it.
Yeah, Trent Park is great, as it really will serve as a neighborhood park for this neighborhood. And I know that, as you mentioned, sport committee's looking at connectivity from a trail perspective and pedestrian over to Trent Park, but also then vehicles. We do want to connect Willowbrook with this neighborhood, as we've done with all of our neighborhoods, to have that connectivity, which is really important for neighborhood connections. So that will be important as well. Now, you mentioned earlier, we've largely been talking about the upper parcel, 50 acres, I think maybe more like 30 developable land. But you've mentioned that lower parcel, which is owned by the Urban Renewal Authority, which is essentially you and the rest of the council just wearing a different hat. Talk about that commercial piece. I know, I think the focus right now is on residential, but what's the vision for that commercial component?
Well, and it's a great segue because connectivity between neighborhoods is very important. We don't want to have little enclaves where you're in this neighborhood, but you can't connect to that neighborhood, and it feels like there's a big wall between, and that's not something that we're looking to do. And at the same time, there's a commercial component that is town-owned property, and it is part of the Smith Ranch, and it's going to be very important to connect the two in a very coherent way. And it's also important because right now, and I think this is an advantage to Silverthorne, we don't have, with a few exceptions out there, but by and large, we do not have a property tax. And so it's extremely important that we have vibrant commercial components that continue to balance our residential costs with our commercial and our sales tax base. And so it is very important that the commercial component of the Smith Ranch develop in a coherent way, and I think in a way that will really be a great synergy between the two, the new neighborhood and the surrounding neighborhoods. So I would imagine a lot of sort of convenience type of retail there at some point.
I think, we maybe didn't mention earlier, the 50 acres for the residential was purchased, and then it was years later that the commercial was purchased, but I think the council really saw the opportunity to comprehensively plan the whole site. And that's the intent right now. While we're really focused on the residential, we are master planning the entire site and really blurring the line between, since the town owns all of that property, we're not going to have to follow a property line, and really connecting that neighborhood to the commercial center. So I think that's an interesting opportunity.
Well, and that's right. And again, I think we would hope that with the commercial eventually coming into place, that this would be an entire neighborhood that would be very walkable and accessible by transit, and that the connections between the various components of it are really quite seamless.
Yeah. One other thing that is kind of in the works now, it's not solidified, but we are talking to the fire district, Lake Dome Fire Rescue. We have an opportunity to partner on this site, which may work out better than a previous site. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, we're very appreciative of the many components and partners that are in Summit County, and certainly the new, currently Lake Dillon Fire District, but the new Summit Fire Authority is going to be a major component of all we do. And it is true that in recent years, there was a lot of talk and even some land exchange just a little bit further to the north and on the east side of the highway in anticipation of a new fire district building and station. And in cooperation and in consultation with the fire district, what they're telling us is that being a little bit closer to the I-70 intersection from a response time perspective is valuable, and that the Smith Ranch is a little bit more of a desirable area than what we were talking about previously. And so I appreciate the fact that the council and the town staff have been very amenable at looking at an alternative place that maybe is a better fit for everybody.
And so I think when folks look at the site plan, they will see that on there. Again, that's in the planning phase, and we'll see if we can come to fruition there. But that's located really more down kind of on the commercial piece. I think the fire district would like to have easy access to that intersection. We should mention as well that there will be a signalized intersection there at Ruby Ranch and Highway 9, maybe not in the very first phase of this, but not too long after. So that's important for them, and I think important for all of the folks that will be living there. That will be warranted when we start adding some more units.
Sure, and I'm sure some people watching this right now are going, oh no, not another traffic light. But at the same time, it's very important that we have safety, and certainly we envision this as a very family-oriented neighborhood, and so being able to get coherent, safe passage out of this area and onto the highway either direction, and obviously down toward the school, is going to be very important.
I mean, the Blue River Trail is right across there, and a signalized intersection there would be huge to helping families get to that amenity, because right now you have to go all the way up really to the school, the elementary school, to cross. So I think, traffic signal, I know you gotta stop, but it's something that will be important for that neighborhood. Again, looking at the site plan, when folks look at that, it's probably important for them to understand phasing. This doesn't all just show up next year. Maybe talk a little bit through what people are thinking as far as how many units a year. I know it's early to be talking, in certain numbers, but what are the thoughts there?
Right. Well, obviously there's a fair amount of site work that has to be done here, and we would anticipate getting through all of the site plan approvals probably in the early part of 2018 that would really allow the site work to begin as soon as the snow melts and the soils and so forth are dry enough to be worked with properly. And then we would hope to see some vertical component starting to occur in 2018. And I think realistically, we'd maybe be looking at 20 to 25 units in the first year to become available. And then, of course, continue to work in successive years with a lot of the infrastructure in place. I think subsequent phases would go a lot more quickly.
Yeah, and we're cognizant of market absorption and what others are doing. Some of our partners are doing with their housing development, so don't want to oversaturate. And so, 20, 25, maybe it's 30 units a year. And like you said, it will take us a number of years to maybe get up to that 160, 170 total build out. But I think the demand is there, and we'll just have to see what each year can absorb and what we can construct each year.
Well, and it's true. This county is thankfully not such a big place that we're all off doing our own things, and having some coordination and understanding what kind of product is coming online in other places is a really key thing. And if we all work together to address a need, we're going to end up addressing the need in a lot better way than if we all just went our own directions. So understanding what other parts of the county are doing, working with the Summit Combined Housing Authority. These are all very important things, and I very much appreciate that Summit County is a place that the various municipal jurisdictions do tend to work well together.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Housing Authority. I think that's a great resource for folks who are thinking about, that interests me. Maybe I'd like to live in Silverthorne. They're a great clearinghouse for a lot of different programs, loan assistance and other things. So I would encourage people to go check that resource out. And you want to be ready when these things are built. You got to get
Absolutely.
be a part of that process. So maybe one last thing before we sign off. Again, it's kind of a little early because it's going to be a while before we actually, do a ribbon cutting on a unit there. But as you mentioned, deed restrictions, that's critical. That's really what drives workforce housing and allows it to maintain its affordability over time. What's the council thinking about your initial thoughts on a deed restriction? What does that look like?
Well, we're very fortunate that we've got a number of jurisdictions in the county that have wrestled with all sorts of different types of deed restrictions. And I think for most of the council, the important thing is that we don't have too much bracket creep, and that we are trying to keep the 80% AMI housing 80% and the 100% 100%, and that we also not fall into traps where people who have held or owned the property for a longer period of time get penalized, and those that have owned it for less time maybe can realize more profit.
Yeah.
And again, we want people to enjoy the benefits of ownership. We want them to be able to have some reasonable latitude in the marketplace. But again, the entire point of this, and the reason why the voters have supported the tax to help underwrite these projects, is that these houses stay affordable workforce housing well into the future.
Over time, yeah. Great. Well, thank you for highlighting what's going on at Smith Ranch. Obviously, a lot more to come. And as you mentioned, we will have public hearings and meetings and a lot of different opportunities. Maybe one more time, we'll put Lena's number up on the screen for folks who are interested in providing feedback on, the site plan and some of that. But also, I think council's interested in hearing thoughts on deed restrictions and all of those other
Absolutely.
components that go along with it.
This will be a far better project the more public input we get, from housing mix to AMI considerations, architecture, you name it. If we have good input from the public, we will have a great project in the end. So
Great.
I would absolutely encourage people to share their thoughts and to participate in every step along the way.
Great. Well, I think that's a great wrap up. Thanks again for highlighting what's going on at Smith Ranch. And that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Silverthorne Signal.